Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I would like to invite you to take a look at a review of a game that I have already shown you on our channel. I have already presented an unboxing, or rather an untubing of this title some time ago. An untubing because this game is, in contrast to most wargames, published in a tube. This game was published by Command Post Games in 2017 and it is called Pub Battles Antietam 1862. So this will be a game focusing on the Battle of Antietam or Sharpsburg. This was the single most bloodiest day in American history, because the most bloody battle during the American Civil War was of course Gettysburg, but Antietam was a single-day battle, and when compared to Gettysburg, the number of casualties during this single day was much higher. This was a very important battle because this is a battle during which the Union Army didn't manage to destroy, to block, to annihilate the army of General Lee. Lee managed to retreat, and although this battle was considered a minor Union victory, in fact the Southern Army almost, well, not intact but well organized, managed to retreat and to fight another day. This game, which is designed for 1 to 14 players, is a game which really interested me because I already reviewed also a second game by Command Post Games, The Forest of the Impaled, and I really loved this title. Today I would like to focus on Antietam 1862, so first of all I would like to show you the components of this game, then take a brief look at the mechanisms, and at the end to give you my final thoughts and a final conclusion. The game was designed by Marshall Barrington. It is a game which should be played in about 45 to 60 minutes, and the minimum age of the players is 12 years old. Let's now take a look at the elements, then the mechanisms, and at the end a final conclusion. Let's go! At first, let's take a quick look at all the elements enclosed in the tube of Antietam 1862. The first and major element which we receive is the game map, which depicts Sharpsburg, because this battle was also called the Battle of Sharpsburg, and its surrounding area. As you can see, this is not a standard gaming map which we can find in most war games, so no hexagonal grid, no point-to-point system. This is a map which really resembles an old map depicting the terrain on which the battle took place. So we won't be moving our units through hexes, we won't be spending movement points according to some terrain charts. We will be just moving our units forward, or maybe rotating them up to 45 degrees through real terrain. So as you can see, we have different terrain features on this gaming map. We have some woods, we have some crops, we have some roads, we have some streams, we have the Potomac River, the Antietam Creek, which will be the major obstacle for the majority of the Union Army, some additional terrain features, and each time a unit moves, we will have to carefully look at the terrain that it passes through. If such a unit passes through a town, through a wood, our mobility will be decreased, and the maximum distance that our unit can move will be decreased as well. I like this idea because it's an unusual approach to movement, to maneuvering, which is quite new to me, because I played only a few games which use these mechanisms, and most of them were skirmish games. Most of them were miniature games. Where it comes to pure war games, this is one of the few exceptions. Now, what I found a little bit confusing is the fact that, as you can see, there are really many terrain features on this playing map, and the units are quite large compared to some terrain features. So you will be wondering from time to time, do I have to reduce my movement points? Did I cross a terrain feature? Did the majority of my playing piece cross such a terrain feature? Well, the rules say that if only a part of our piece crosses such a terrain feature, we have to decrease our mobility. But at the same time, sometimes we will be wondering if I really did cross this terrain feature. Additionally, rules governing the turning of units say that we can rotate our unit up to 45 degrees, spending 1/3 of our movement points. But at the same time, what is 45 degrees? Well, it's rather easy to be confused by this rule, because it's easy to rotate a piece up to 90 degrees. 45 is much more difficult. Sometimes it will be 50, 40 degrees, and we will have to discuss those things with our opponent. Not something major, but I believe that those rules and the lack of some grid, of some hexes, of some terrains maybe, or some spots where we can locate our units might be from time to time confusing. Now, the second major element that we receive are the blocks, which, as you can see, are, as I said, quite large. So we have the Southern Army of General Lee and the Northern Army of the Union. Those blocks are wooden blocks with stickers applied on them. Each unit has a corps number and also the name of its commander. Some units have additional info, such as, for instance, the elite symbol. Some Union units in this battle will have also the G designation, which means those units will be green. Their morale will be lower, and their efficiency in combat will be smaller than standard units. Alongside those large blocks, we have also some small wooden blocks, and those blocks will represent commanders, leaders, and each leader will have their own name, and at most times also the corps which such a leader can command. Of course, General Lee can command all the Southern Army. As you can see, the Northern Army starts the majority of this army starts the game on the other side of the Antietam Creek. Those initial positions, those are not the initial positions, but the initial positions of the armies are being governed by special rules, because one of the elements that we receive is a setup sheet on which there are strict rules governing this setup. We have some lines which indicate where we can place initially our forces. Firstly, the southern player, the player controlling the Confederate army, can place his own blocks to the west of the red line, so occupying Sharpsburg and the terrain surrounding. Then the Union player has the possibility to place his own forces in 3 different sectors. He has to place some of his forces to the north. Another sector also has to be used by the northern player, and the Union player also has this big sector to the east of the map where he can place the other units. Some of his units begin the game outside the board, and they will enter as reinforcements, so as the second Corps Hill Division, which will be a southern reinforcement. The second sheet, the second chart is a terrain effects chart, which will tell us exactly what will be the movement costs entering some terrain features and what will be their impact on combat, at most times reducing the number of dice rolled or eventually giving us additional dice in combat. At the same time, we have also the information about the rates of march of the 2 different unit types, because we have foot units, so infantry units, we have cavalry units, we have also some artillery units and commanders. The two major ones, the two most basic ones, are the infantry and cavalry units, which have some separate movement rates. In this version of the game, there are no rulers to indicate the movement rates. Those were added as Kickstarter bonuses. So if somebody wants to play this game with those rulers, he has to do them by himself. So I did them. The first one, which is shorter, will be used for infantry. The second one for mounted units. Each of those formations has also their own disc, their own wooden disc with the corps number, which will be drawn during every turn in order to activate this unit. An activated corps can be moved and the combats are resolved at the turn's end. We also receive some dice. We receive 6-sided dice, which are blue, and red dice used by the two players, and we have also a big black die, which will be used, for instance, to track the turn of the game. The final components which are enclosed in this game are the rules. First of all, the rules governing the system, and secondly also the special rules which are governing this specific battle. As you can see, those rules were prepared on some shining paper in color with some examples. Not very complicated rules, not very well written either, because there are some ambiguous things. There are some things which, in my opinion, were not sufficiently clarified. So after reading these rules, you will be sometimes wondering how to play some mechanisms. The special rules governing Antietam include a historical background information about the battle, and then additional rules which will sometimes change the basic rules described in this rulebook. Now, how those rules look like, what are the objectives of both sides? Let's take a look at this. A game of Antietam 1862 is played in a series of turns, and a full game can last not less than 8 turns. The objective of both sides is to obtain the maximum number of victory points, which are counted at the game's end. The Confederacy gains 1 victory point for eliminating 2 Union units. The Union gains 1 victory point for eliminating each Confederacy unit. So the Union on paper has a much easier task, because not only the army is more numerous, they obtain 1 victory point by eliminating each infantry unit of the Confederacy. But this is only easy on paper, because the Union army is composed of some green units. The Confederate army, on the other hand, has some elite units which are much more efficient in combat. So this is a subtle difference, but the fact that the way how the victory points are being counted at the game's end influences gameplay and is also a factor differentiating both armies. And I think it's a good idea, because the Battle of Antietam was all about a struggle between 2 very different armies. Now, how a turn of Antietam looks like. The first and very important part of a turn is putting all the command cheats into a cap. So each corps which is in the game has its own cheat, which is then put into a cap. The second phase is just drawing randomly one of those cheats, and this cheat will indicate which corps can be activated at this time. And this command cheat is, as I explained earlier, associated to a unit, and in this case this would be the Union cavalry. So by drawing this cheat, we can now activate this cavalry unit or those two cavalry units which are part of the Union cavalry. Now activating a unit enables us to move this unit using the ruler, because this ruler will indicate how the mobility of such a unit will look like. While moving we have to spend movement allowance, because if we cross streams, if we cross forests or other terrain features, we will have to reduce our mobility. So after moving, we can end our movement somewhere near the opponent. At this point, it is also possible to launch attacks. To launch an attack, we have to be at a certain distance from our HQ. But of course, we can first move our HQ in order to be closer to our unit and to enable it an attack. And the attack consists of entering in contact with the enemy. During movement, we can rotate our unit up to 45 degrees for every 1/3 of our movement allowance. So because of that, we can enter in contact with an opponent even if our facing was different before movement. If we enter into contact in such a way that the majority of both pieces touch one another, a combat will take place. But this combat will be resolved only after all the activations had ended. Because after ending our movement with the units which are part of a corps, we draw another random cheat in order to activate a new unit. We move this unit, then we draw another cheat, and etc. We end the activations, and only at this point we begin resolving combat. Resolving combat consists of resolving separate fights, because in each combat we will have pairs of units facing one another. The order in which the combats will be resolved is chosen by the player who has a better command rating, and this command rating for the Confederacy in this battle is 4 and for the Federals is 3. So the Confederate player will choose the order in which the battles will be resolved. Now, how a battle looks like. First of all, as I said earlier, it's a one-to-one battle. This battle consists first of all of a contact fire. This fire is resolved through die rolls. We verify the types of units engaged in combat. Infantry, artillery and cavalry units normally roll 3 dice, but in this game each cavalry unit is considered dragoon units, and those units use only 2 dice in combat. Additionally, some additional terrain features can change the number of dice used. For instance, if attacking a unit which we are flanking, so we are attacking from the side, we obtain an additional die. So each unit will roll a certain number of dice. The rolls will be simultaneous unless we have an artillery unit supporting our defense. In such a case, the artillery enables us to roll our dice before our opponent, and that's a major bonus. If we do not have any artillery units supporting the defense, we roll the dice separately. Hits are scored on 4, 5s and 6s, and each hit will cause a step loss. A unit normally begins the game fresh. The first hit makes the unit spent, so we have to put it in such a way. A second hit during the same combat causes a unit to retreat. It has to turn around and it has to move back. A third hit during the same combat eliminates directly the unit. So a unit which was already spent, which receives 2 damage in a future combat, will also be eliminated. Some units are elite units, and those units will ignore the first step loss Some others will be green units, which will instantly take 2-step losses. After exchanging this this fire during the first round of combat, if the combating units are still in contact, the defending unit has the opportunity to disengage, to retreat. If he decides to stay put, the attacker has the same option to retreat. If they both stay where they were, a second round of combat is resolved in the same way. Now, it is possible to attack, as I said earlier, from the flank. It is possible to attack even from the rear. And if a unit attacked in such a way that it is surrounded cannot retreat, it is also eliminated. So it's another possibility to eliminate units. Headquarters cannot be eliminated, they are just displaced. After resolving every combat, we move on to a new turn, so we begin drawing chits again from the cup. Now, there are some other rules governing play, for instance, morale, because spent units can become fresh again if we decide not to move them and just to make them fresh again, unless we had lost previously an amount of units which is superior to 50% of the corps' initial forces. We have rules governing fire arcs, line of sight. We have rules governing the possibility to act later or earlier during a turn, because it is possible after drawing a chit to try to activate one of our HQs earlier or later than it would normally be activated. In such a case, after drawing such a chit, we can try to do a command test. So, for instance, if we draw the second Confederate Corps and we want to activate the first one, not the second one, we can just try to accelerate the activation of this unit by making a die roll. We have to roll 4 or less, because the Confederate command rating during this battle is 4. If we manage to do so, we can activate the first corps before the second one is being activated. Another option is to delay the activation of a drawn unit. If we manage to successfully do the test, we can put this chit back into the cap and keep drawing. But this is only a one-time shot, because no matter the result of such a test, such an HQ is considered spent for the entire turn. So we cannot delay an activation of an HQ twice or even more times during a turn. Now, there are some other rules governing some other elements, as I said earlier, but I won't be talking about them right now. I would like rather to tell you what are my opinions about this game, what I think are its strong and a little bit weaker points. So let's pass on to the conclusion. Some time ago, I have reviewed the second game from Command Post Games on our channel, and this was The Forest of the Impaled. I have given you a very enthusiastic review of this game, and so I was wondering how Antietam 1862 will look like compared to this title. I must say, I really prefer The Forest of the Impaled. Antietam 1862 is a very different game, and I would like to give you my opinion about it. First of all, if we compare the components of both those titles, well, both of them are enclosed in a tube. Both of them have a fantastic game map, but if I were to compare, I would say that The Forest of the Impaled has a very much prettier game map and a much more functional map. One of the weaker points of Antietam is, in my opinion, this game map, because first of all, this is a game map full of details. It really depicts all the major terrain features which are lying in Sharpsburg and its surroundings, and because of it, and because of the size of the elements used on the game map, it is very difficult sometimes to tell if my unit is in an open terrain place, is it in a wood place, is it on a hill, does it travel through a hill. It's very difficult to look. It's very difficult sometimes to see the boundaries between some terrain features. In my opinion, a less detailed map would work better. The second aspect, which I think deserves to be underlined, is the fact that the rules are not so easy to understand as you might expect. In the Forest of the Impaled, I had absolutely no doubt how to play the game. Here, I had to wonder how some things worked. Additionally, I had to wonder if I have all the elements needed to play the game. Because when reading the rules about movement, I wondered how could I measure the distance. And absolutely nowhere in the rules you have the information that you have to use the ruler. The ruler, which was an addition given to Kickstarter backers. I lacked such ruler. I had to create one by myself. It's not an issue, but I would like to see in the rules that I have to possess such an element, just in order also to verify if I have all the things needed to play. Having said that, I would like now to tell you what I really liked in Antietam 1862, because it is a very interesting game. The first thing is that I really like the way that Marshal Barrington managed to underline the differences between the two armies, because Antietam was a battle between two very different armies. On one side we had the Union Army composed of a high number of green troops, of a far smaller experience. On the other side, we had the army of General Lee, where we had a lot of veteran units, a lot of soldiers who already fought in battles on previous occasions. So those armies were different. The Northern Army is more numerous, but it is less efficient, it is less experienced. The southern side has to cope with numerical inferiority, but at the same time it has a lot of experienced units. A second aspect is also the fact that the number of corps on the two sides is very different. The Union Army has a lot of them, but all of them are composed of 2 or 3 divisions. So while activating such a unit, you will have only 2 or 3 units each time. Additionally, if you lose 50% or more of those divisions, you will not be able to recover the steps lost by the units remaining on the battlefield. And this is a huge factor, because the Southern Army, which has more divisions inside a corps, can more often regain lost steps, and this makes the whole difference, because those units, even if reduced, can regain their full strength capability. So I like the way in which some minor tweaks managed to really differentiate the two opposing armies. The victory conditions are also different, because the Southern Army receives 1 point for eliminating each pair of American units. Northern units. The Northern player or players receives 1 point for each eliminated Southern block. So the Southern Army is in numerical inferiority, and additionally it has to score more kills in order to win. That's really a big difference. The second thing that I really like in this game is the fact that you receive a lot of minor things that really increase the chrome of the game. So you have some additional rules governing line of sight, you have some additional rules governing skirmishes, you have some additional very very well laid rules governing combat. You have the reserve option, which I didn't explain while showing you the components and the mechanisms. In a few words, it's an additional option in which you can transfer some of your forces from the map to the reserve using additional paper sheets on which you stock those counters. So this is a new mode which will increase the fog of war feeling during gameplay. A really nice addition. So this game is full of chrome. It's not very complicated. It's very dynamic, which is, in my opinion, the third major positive aspect, positive element of this game. It's really fast, it's really dynamic, and it's very intuitive to play. If not the movement, if not the game map, which in my opinion is not sufficiently functional and which can really make the game bog down in some situations. Because if you wander, if you see the unit because the line of sight passes through a part of the hill, you can wonder if while moving you can reduce the number by 1/3, or you do not have to do this. Sometimes you will wonder if you did turn 40 or 45 degrees, which can be a huge difference. You have to take into consideration that while playing this game, you will have to negotiate with your opponents, with your teammates, in order to make sure that everyone is okay with the interpretation of some rules or of the situation on the game map. Having said that, I believe that Antietam 1862, although inferior to the Forests of the Impale, is still a very interesting design, a very dynamic one, a very interesting from this differentiation of the two armies point of view, a game which allows you to recreate this very interesting battle. If you like quick games, if you like pretty games, because it's a very pretty game, this might be a very good choice. This was a review of Antietam 1862 in the Pub series battles, the Pub Battles series, published by Command Post Games. Take a look at our other videos. We have some reviews and some unboxings. Have a fantastic day and see you next time.